Ruth, thank you for coming back to the show and continuing this wonderful series.
Well, thank you for inviting me again. It's just wonderful to be here.
Well, what we want to do today is we want to talk about cultivating wisdom. And in our last series, we were talking about thought, and we've been talking about how thought really determines what happens, our experience in life. And you talked about values and how our values determine our thoughts. You mentioned, though, that perception is another important part of this formula. So help us understand that.
Yes, perception is another important thing to understand, that our thoughts actually are determined by our perception. And this is the way it works. It's a very easy thing to understand. Dr. Hora actually was able to articulate 7 levels of seeing. Isn't that amazing? That we can see on 7 different levels. We don't usually think of it that way, but this is true. And first, it starts with our sensory impressions, our senses. So we say that perception is sensory.
And that's the basic 5 senses
and
that we all learn about.
And that's the basic 5 senses. But, not necessarily do we understand how we really do see through our senses. So just a brief explanation of that with our eyes, that we see what?
We see our thoughts, right? We see, what do we see?
Not yet. As a young child, you're getting an impression about the world around you. So you're seeing just light and shadow.
Yes, right.
And then with your ears.
Yes, we're hearing sound.
You're hearing sound, and you're also hearing the direction from which it's coming.
Okay.
And with our noses.
Yes, we're smelling whatever's out there.
Yeah, aromas and odors, and the direction in which it's coming from. And with our tongue.
Yes, we're tasting what comes in.
Salt and sweet and sour. And with our skin.
Yes, we're sensing, we're feeling what our environment.
We're textures and temperatures and things of that sort. So that's the world as we are beginning to learn about it. Now what happens very soon is that we begin to be interpreting the world, but it's interpreted for us. For example, we're taught that this is a table, this is a chair, this is a person. So we're learning now to name things. This is being taught to us, and this is a very important thing to keep in mind. It's not our thought, it's a thought that's being taught to us. And so this second level is called cognition. That's intellectual. And what happens here is that we're taught to name something, and then it is interpreted for us. So this is good, this is bad. This kind of person is evil, this kind of person is good, is an angel. Or this food is good, this food is not good. So our likes and our dislikes and our prejudices begin. And then following that are our emotions and our feelings. So we're beginning to experience our thoughts. So first we see with our senses, and then we're seeing with our thoughts. And that's what's really unusual to become aware of.
Well, then doesn't this lead into that kind of thinking where we think, okay, so who we are is really determined by our environment, and then that's all we are. We're just products of our parents and our heritage and our neighborhoods and the schools we go to, that this really determines who we are.
Exactly. That's the whole point, you see? So it has been determined for us. And of course, through our own experience. Because if we've had bad experiences in life, then we tend to think that life isn't very good.
But how do we know an experience is bad? Is because someone told us it was bad.
Exactly. Or we've been hurt by it.
Yes.
So we're learning from our own experience as well as had it interpreted for us. So we're judging by appearances, and we're interpreting according to what we have been taught or from our own experience. And it's on those 2 levels that we live almost 100% of the time. Well, we live 100% of the time until we learn that there are other levels of seeing. So let's go to the next level.
Yes, please. Get us out of here.
Yes, get us out of here.
We're tired of this.
Exactly. So the next level is when we develop the ability to feel what someone else is feeling, particularly people who are loved ones. We can feel
being empathetic.
Being empathetic, exactly. So the third level of seeing is called empathy. And we can experience what someone else is, or we can feel what someone else is feeling. And we can see that that's either positive or negative. If we're having a positive reaction to what someone else is feeling, then we would be saying that we're empathizing with them in a sympathetic way. We would be sympathizing. And sometimes we actually are feeling what someone else is feeling and have a negative reaction to it. It's as if we're saying, you shouldn't feel that way. So we call that antipathizing. So it has two parts, a positive part and a negative part, sympathizing and antipathizing.
And then if I'm recognizing that you don't like what I'm feeling, then I'll start to react to that.
Exactly. It gets complicated,
yes,
doesn't it?
because I'm empathizing with your antipathizing, and then here we are back and forth. It's a ping pong game.
Exactly. And we can hurt each other this way because we're being judgmental. And so this is where we learn to judge, you see. So then if we...
So there's got to be something better than that. Let's keep going on to these other levels.
The next level is an expansion of that empathetic awareness. And it's expanded in terms of space. So we pick up feelings at a distance, right? And we call that telepathy.
Right.
So we can feel what someone else is feeling at a distance, even 3,000 miles away.
Oh yes, it doesn't matter. Time and space doesn't really make any difference there.
Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting.
See, that space has nothing to do with it.
We've all had that experience where we've known who's on the phone before we pick it up.
That's right.
Or we're thinking about someone and then we get a letter from them in the mail or something like that happens.
And the same thing is true here. We can have a positive reaction or a negative reaction.
Meaning we can pick up things that are scary or that we're uncomfortable about?
Yes.
As well as we can pick up things that are positive.
Yes. So just as with the ordinary empathizing, we also can pick up from a distance, whether it's negative or positive or hostile thoughts or a good thought.
Oh, I see. We can pick up if someone's angry at us about something.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Or just suffering in some way. They're angry. And then the next level is what we call the level of intuition, where we have a premonition of something bad that's about to happen or an expectancy of something good. So again, it has two sides, the positive and the negative. And there are people who are very gifted at picking up things in the future, which is the intuition. It's really a premonition of something about to happen. And they are very gifted. We call them psychics.
Right.
You know, if somebody picks up something from us, we call them psychic. If we pick it up from somebody, then we're a psychic.
Right. We're calling it reading the future.
Yes. But we all have this ability.
Yes.
And in some people it's very, very well developed. Some people are very sensitive in this area. But we all have this ability. And not many of us realize that we all can cultivate an interest in this ability. And then we come to the level of spiritual discernment. Now this is a whole other thing, because spiritual discernment has to do with the ability to see the realm of spirit and to separate it from the phenomenal world, because actually these first 5 levels that we've talked about, sensory perception, cognition, empathizing, telepathy, and intuition, that all has to do with the phenomenal world. So even though it seems to be mysterious, especially when we get into the paranormal or the psychic, it's still part of the material world. So
meaning that we're picking up things about events and people and places and things.
It all has to do with the material world, the phenomenal world. So the spiritual discernment gives us the ability to see beyond that and to differentiate between the two. So for example, we can see the difference between spiritual values. Last week we were talking about spiritual values, and we can see the difference between those and human values or material values.
Now you talk about this in terms of seeing it. We can see spiritual discernment.
We actually are seeing, we're discerning something, not with our physical eyes, not with our senses.
So it's not seeing in the same way we see each other.
Exactly.
It's seeing, but with a different faculty of our seeing?
Of different faculty, and we call that the faculty of awareness. So it's a spiritual faculty, and we call it spiritual discernment because it can discern the difference between what belongs to the phenomenal world and what belongs to the realm of spirit.
So give us some example of that. So what is that discernment? Spiritual discernment. Say more about what that is.
For example, we have spoken before about love, divine love, spiritual love, being non-personal, non-conditional benevolence. And we can see that human love is a feeling between persons and even bodies, we could say, and that's part of the material world. And what we're, of course, interested in is spiritualizing. As we mature, we spiritualize our human love so that it includes the non-conditional and it's non-personal. So we could say that spiritual love begins when we start to pay attention in order to understand something. That's really a selfless kind of love, and there's nothing asked for. It's just something that we're aware of. So it's awareness of the need to pay attention. So that's a form of spiritual love. And as we mature, we become aware of non-personal, non-conditional benevolence. And that doesn't sound very appealing at first because it's non-personal, but what it means is that it's just the love of being loving with no strings attached. That's divine love. So it's very, very different from human love.
From human love, right.
So we all pass through, the human love stage and hopefully mature into spiritual love, because
so
that's
you're
our
saying
ability.
So discernment, spiritual discernment, is the ability for us to be aware of that part of love, that aspect of love?
The difference between the two is spiritual discernment.
So you can discern when someone is acting out of that kind of spiritual love versus the human love? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Can you see some of that?
Yes, I can begin to.
Because human love is personal and it's conditional.
Yes.
So that's the difference right there. And it can be good and bad.
Well, it's like I'm thinking about, okay, so someone might say something to me, someone that I care about or someone that I love, and they might say something to me that is a correction or is a comment about something that is bringing up something that I was doing that was really not quite in alignment, right? So I can discern whether they're saying that without judgment and just saying it in, what about this?
Yes.
Or if they're saying it with judgment and criticism and it comes from there, then I'm going to receive it maybe in a different way. Mm-hmm. But that then depends on my spiritual discernment, right?
Yes.
If I can kind of hear the truth that they're saying, even if they say it with a kind of judgment, I can still separate.
That's right. And that's the ability to discern the difference between the two.
Okay.
So it's non-judgmental.
Right.
You see?
Right.
It's non-conditional and non-judgmental.
Interesting.
It's a wonderful gift.
It is.
That we can hear others and not become reactive and not become resentful or critical in reacting back to them in a resentful way, but just to receive it, say, oh, that's an interesting thought. I can consider that. I'll look at that. So it's a wonderful faculty, and it has to be developed in us. We don't come by it naturally, apparently. It seems to need to be cultivated.
So is this how we begin to develop and cultivate wisdom? To be aware of the thoughts that are harmful or destructive or invalid, as you might say in metapsychiatry, versus the thoughts that are divinely inspired.
Exactly. So. Yes.
Say more about that.
Well, this is the level at which we differentiate between what we call valid thoughts and invalid thoughts. So if we're entertaining in consciousness resentment, if we're being judgmental, we're aware of that because we're paying attention to the content of our consciousness. And we are interested in spiritualizing it. So we would then move right up to the level, because that's down on the level of cognition, right? When we're judging and criticizing.
That's right.
And so we pass right through the 3 psychic levels, the 3 paranormal levels, into, or what we call extrasensory perception, that's what they are, right into the spirit level of spiritual discernment, where we're able to transmute that thought. We're able to be transformed by that recognition and to return love for what seemed to be criticism. And we may have made a mistake. It may not be true that it was critical.
Right.
It may have been given in the right spirit. So we always have to allow for the fact that we may have interpreted it incorrectly.
Yes. I had a great example of that I'll share from someone I was working with. And him and his wife were going through a difficult financial time. And so the wife offered to sell the diamond from her engagement ring so that they could have some money. Mm-hmm. And at first the husband heard that as an attack on their marriage. He heard it as, oh, you don't love me anymore. But after he thought about it for a little while, he realized, no, it was this incredible act of love and commitment to the relationship, and say, let me let me be a participant in what needs to happen.
Yes.
Because I want to keep this relationship going and I'm with you as a team member.
Mm-hmm.
So he could make that distinction after a little thought.
So that's spiritual discernment.
That's spiritual
He saw
discernment.
that it came from love,
Right.
not from any other thing.
Yes.
So that's wonderful.
right. So that's a good example, right,
Exactly.
of what you're talking about.
Yes, yes. So this is all on the faculty of awareness. This is not a thought. These are not thoughts. These are actualities.
So are you saying
realities.
We can't make this happen? I mean, we want to go back to thought, and so we all want our lives to be wonderful, and we all want our lives to be harmonious. And so what you're saying is that our thoughts are what determine our experience. And so if I'm having a judgmental or angry thought, that's going to be revealed in my experience. So I just want to change that thought, right? Can't I just change that thought?
You can if you know the spiritual counterfact.
Okay.
But if you don't, it's like changing a thought from a blue elephant to a pink elephant. It's the same thing.
Okay.
But if you know what the spiritual counterfact to that thought is, then you can. So the spiritual counterfact to human love is spiritual love, and each of those has been defined. Human love being, as we said, personal and conditional. And it does not necessarily have goodwill attached to it, because we can have the flip side of it, be very angry at somebody we would really rather love, but at that moment we're judging them and we're criticizing them, so we're not being very loving.
One question I have about this, though, is it seems like it's a different process, a different function to me, and maybe this is just the different level that we're on, that it's a difference between, oh, let me just change that thought, which might be kind of an affirmation. Let me just start thinking positive thoughts about everybody. It seems to me that when we're at that level of spiritual discernment, it's much more of, oh, I'm aware of a different way, of more spaciousness in a way. I can hear it or see it in a different way.
That's right, you see, because we have reached that level of that faculty of awareness. So we're not the thinker anymore, trying to do things in the way we always have, as exists on the first two levels, or the level called cognition. But we're now exploring the fact that we are a consciousness, we are an awareness. We have the ability to be aware of the difference between those things which are non-material, what we call spiritual, non-material substance, and to see the difference between those things that manifest materially in the world. So beyond the level of spiritual discernment, by the way, is the level of beholding. That's the seventh and the highest level. And beholding actually is actualizing or realizing the reality of spiritual values, realizing the reality of inspired, creative, intelligent ideas, realizing the reality of God, of the infinite omnipresence, of this force, this mental force, this intelligence, which is always available to us to govern our lives and our affairs. So it's the realization of that. And once you realize that that is really so, then you know. You don't have to believe anything anymore. You don't have to accept what anybody says or reject what they say. You can just say, I know. I know because I have realized it in my own life. I have realized, Hegel, for example, that peace, assurance, gratitude, and love are realities. They're not thoughts, they're not senses, they're not feelings, they're realities. That's a whole level of understanding that we're usually not familiar with. But every one of us has the ability to become aware of these realities. And it's these realities which make our lives good. So we would like to cultivate more interest in spiritual discernment, to discern the difference between the two, and to live more on the level of beholding. And that's possible. And the seven levels of perception or of seeing and the hierarchy of values, which we spoke about last time, are roadmaps for us. They're very powerful roadmaps. They give us the framework within which to see life and to know that we are capable of so much more than we have ever been taught.
So these seven levels of perception help us understand or see our thoughts. Is that what you're saying? They help us discern the nature of our thoughts so that we can begin to be more open to a different kind of thinking?
Well, we're discerning the nature of our thoughts back on the lower levels.
Okay.
You see.
Yes.
Because our thoughts are determined by others and by our experience. So we grow up, for example, thinking, I can't do anything right. That's a very common thing for people to experience. Or, I'm stupid. I don't know how to do things.
Yeah, or things will never work out for me.
Things will never work out for me. They never do. You know, that's been my experience. And you're stuck on that level. And that's the whole problem with life, is that so many people are stuck not knowing that there is so much more for us to become aware of.
But once you can become aware of that, someone might say, oh, well, let me just change the thought. So now I'm going to think everything works out for me.
No. See, that's the difference between positive and negative thinking. It's
Right.
the flip side of it. But we're saying this is something totally different. This is on a level of awareness, not on a level of thinking. We're not the thinkers here. We are the receivers of the ideas. We're the receivers, the awarenesses of these spiritual values. So we're not doing this. We can't do them, in fact, because they already exist. We can't invent them. We don't make them up. And we can try to, but then we're just kidding ourselves. If you don't understand them, what they really are, then you can fool yourself. But if you understand that real love is non-personal, non-conditional benevolence, then you'll start looking for it. You'll start understanding what it means to be loved, to love being loving. And you can dwell on that until you come to understand it. But first somebody seems to have to point us in the right direction and define these words for us, and then we can find them. So this upper realm, this spiritual discernment and beholding, is where we would like to live all the time. So we can receive, being awarenesses, being receptive to ideas. We can receive inspired, creative ideas. We can receive the idea that is needed at any moment to govern our lives, at any moment to guide us in whatever way we need to be guided. We can watch that taking place.
Can you talk about this in relationship to parenting now and sort of help us understand how these 7 levels of perception, give us an example or apply it to something that so many of us deal with, which is parenting?
Yes, of course. Well, the first place to start is with the idea that the parent has in mind about the child. Because parents entertain a lot of fantasies about their children. They want them to be this, they don't want them to be that. And those children have a tendency to become what the parents fantasized.
Or the opposite.
So, well, either way.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's their focus of attention. Therefore, the child will tend to grow up thinking of themselves that way, that they're either capable or incapable. So that's a dangerous way to think about a child. Then parents have this other idea. So they fantasize, and parents have this other idea, which is that they should be the ones to control their children. So they can become tyrannical parents, always telling the children what to do. You have to do this, you have to do that, you should do this, you should do that. So children can grow up with tyrannical parents. But there's only one kind of parenting that is really valid, what we call valid, and that's the learning parent. And this is the parent that is spiritual. So the parent that is interested in what is the right idea about the child, and to realize the child is a divine idea born in the mind of the Creator, and that the parent is just the guide here to see what is needed and to provide what is needed for the child, and to stand back and watch the child be unfolded. And that's the most beautiful thing in the world for a parent to observe.
It's really a great privilege.
It's a great privilege.
To be such a close witness to the unfolding of this unique, creative being of light. It's really quite phenomenal.
It is a phenomenal thing because you see, it happens.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen anyway, but the parent can really interfere with that. If it entertains its own fantasies about the child, it becomes tyrannical. So being a learning parent means always paying attention to what is needed at that moment, to guide the child from one stage to the next stage, and to see that it's always good because it is not something they are doing, but something that divine love intelligence is doing through the child.
And through the parent.
And through the parent.
Through that participation.
Yes. So they're both participating in the unfoldment of this beautiful little child that is born perfect in every way and has everything needed to provide for its growth and development.
And when we do that, when we allow that to happen, I mean, I guess you take care of, you do the basic things that need to be done to care for someone, but then you also are always asking the question, okay, so what now? Or who is this uniqueness that I've been entrusted with?
Yes, so you're always watching to see what you can supply next. What stage are they at that moment? What is needed at this moment?
And it seems like being a parent then is also such a great metaphor or an opportunity for the parent to develop spiritually. Because it always seems to, doesn't it seem that the child pushes us or forces us or brings the gift of helping us understand much more deeply who we are or what's possible for us?
And isn't that the joy there?
It is a great joy.
Is for the parent to realize that the child is giving them an enormous gift because it enables the parent to become more spiritually minded.
And there it is, the great cycle of life.
Yes. Which
brings us back to the whole purpose of our show as we begin to close this segment, which is who are we and what is the purpose of our life? Mm-hmm. And so what we've learned here with this, say it again for us all to remind us.
To develop spiritually, to live increasingly on the level of spiritual discernment and beholding so that we can be what we are created to be.
And on that note, Ruth, thank you again for being here with us and talking us through these important points.
Thank you so much, Nancy.
And thank you for listening. This is Nancy Rosanoff with The Listening Place saying bye for now.